Hello, one and all. We're going to get started here in just a sec. First, a quick check. Can everybody hear this just fine? I'm still not seeing questions here. Oh, there they are. Sorry. All right, welcome everybody. There's some really great stuff once again going on the forums. So congratulations to everybody who's posting stuff. I'm incredibly impressed by what's being done and how it's reflecting what you guys are learning. So double plus good marks for everyone there. So welcome to week 4. Week 4, of course, we're going to be talking about flying stuff. You can say the class is really getting off the ground this week if you'll excuse bad puns. But before we get into that, as usual, are there any questions, either on anything we've learned in past weeks or anything you thought up, or any other issue that you want to bring up before we dive headlong into flying animals? And if there is, maybe type a yes so I know it's coming. Okay, good questions, guys. First of all, yes, this is definitely a bad pasted-on creature that I hacked together in Photoshop in about, I'd say at least 2.5 minutes, maybe 3. I just wanted a flying animal for the questions this week. Okay, so there's some good questions here. Remy, I'm trying to avoid putting my brain in a glass. I think sort of like opening up the golden goose to get the eggs, that would end up not working well. Let's see. You had a question by, is it Ian rather than Jan? I saw a little bit of discussion, by the way, last week about how to pronounce your name by a silly English speaker. So if you want to type a pronunciation, I'll stick to that. But anyways, his question was how to build a creature with 1 foot coming from the ilium but from the middle. Do you mean like the middle underneath the animal? Gotcha. What I would actually do in that case, and you're just gonna make like would this be like a 3-legged tripodal animal with like just 1 leg coming from the middle and not the other legs, or did you want 3 legs across the back? Okay. In that case, what I would actually do is design the animal sort of upside down from the way they are now. I would have a single ilium that is actually facing on the bottom side as if the pelvis was upside down hanging off of the vertebrae, and have your hypothetical connector bones. They could be like a pubis and an ischium if you want to make it look like Earth anatomy, or you could just make your own design since you're going off into pretty alien territory here, and have that connect up to the vertebrae, maybe via sacral ribs or whatever. And that way, with it already facing down, you'd be in a much better position to have like shelves in front of and after the leg. I would then go with definitely a mammal or other animal like ball and socket joint, not the open hip socket the dinosaurs have. That would be a disaster in this case. So once you have a ball there, you have quite a bit of motion by your 1 single leg behind and quite a bit of room to add some muscles coming down from the hip structures. Most of your leg, your knee openers and your knee closers are going to come directly from your downward facing kind of plate-like ilium. Your muscles to move the leg back would of course come mostly from the tail if you have a tail, and if not, you might have to have like axial muscles that run around from your sacral area down around behind it, kind of like a little single cheeked butt, if you will. And then, like almost all animals, the muscles that protract or move the femur forward, I would actually have running up underneath the ribs. That group of muscles is called the psoas muscles, PSOAS. I'm not actually swearing there. In mammals, and there's an analogous set of muscles in essentially everything that has legs and vertebrae. And I think that would pretty much take care of it. If you wanted to be really kind of clever and foreign, you could actually build your upside-down pubis or ilium-like bones that went up to connect to the sacrum and have them support other muscles that helped run over the top of the lower muscles and pull the legs side to side. That's actually what happens in all current Earth animals, except of course it's reversed, where the ilium actually has the muscles on the outside there. This would actually make for a more efficient or better leveraged side-to-side pull. So there'd actually be some advantage to that, and it would create some more unique muscle contours to show off. It would definitely come across as very alien, I think. Michael, why don't you ask the 100 Monkeys question on the forums, and I will type up a response, just so that people who are missing this don't have to watch that part of it relative to the anatomy part. But I'd be happy to discuss it, and also that way we can have a longer discussion if you want. Okay, so if nothing else, then let's dive right in to learning how to make animals fly. By the way, this is probably an example of how not to make animals fly right here. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, first, we're going to look at flight in general and the problems that flight gives you guys as designers, because flight does impose some issues that other types of things like hexapods actually do not. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at real-world flyers today because there's quite a bit of variety that is missed. So this will be kind of a, hey, remember, you can also use this as a design base or a design concept rather than the ones that we see used a lot. We're going to actually look at insects a little bit. We're going to look at gliding vertebrates, that is animals that fly but don't generate their own thrust except for when they take off or push out of a tree or something. And then, of course, we'll look at the powered flyers, and we're going to look at all three groups of powered flyers, dinosaurs, mammals, and pterosaurs that have existed, especially because they all do it. There's similarities and differences, and it's really valuable, I think, kind of like when we looked at mammal and dinosaur legs, to figure out what the similarities are, because those should probably be constants in all your designs, and then what the differences are so you can more easily mix and match. Finally, I'm going to sum up some of that with a quick list of do's and don'ts in general, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion, and I'll see how much time we have for how long this will go, but I want to look at various concepts of dragons and other hypothetical flying creatures and designs. Just, I'll also open up to questions for us to talk about some of the things that probably are good cheats if necessary and things that are bad cheats, and just design, an honest discussion of the problems, because really some designs like flying dragons probably wouldn't work as we come up with them, but how can we at least make them look as plausible as possible? And of course we'll be covering things like dragons and wyverns and griffins. Oh my. Okay, so let's head right into flight then. So here's sort of a brief visual synopsis of the problems with flight, which is that unlike, say, a hexapod, where if you come up with a hexapod design that doesn't look very well put together, it's ungainly, the biggest thing that will happen is people might sort of doubt the proportions, but the animator can save it by making it move. And if it just looks ungainly, worst case scenario, it simply isn't as agile as you wanted it to be. But it still could exist, like in the real world. Physics doesn't necessarily bar it. The problem with failing at flight, of course, is that you tend to have a very short lifespan in your creatures. It's one of those things you don't get to screw up at more than once. So basically, that's a fancy way of saying it's really constrained by physics. And the physics is actually pretty complicated. Of course, this is the diagram you'll often see in an introductory physics course, like in high school or college, if you deal with flight. But this is even misleadingly simple, believe it or not, because these diagrams really apply to fixed-wing objects like airplanes. And even in airplanes, the real aerodynamics is quite a bit more complicated than the sort of pat little diagram drawings they give you in introductory to physics. For example, everybody talks about, if you've ever read about flight, that how the teardrop shape is incredibly important because like the air going over the top has to go faster than the air going over the bottom, meaning that this is a lower pressure and it can go up. And while that little story is true in as far as it goes, in reality it also is almost irrelevant even to airplane design. For example, most current airliners that you would fly on actually have flat tops and are curved on the bottom, which if you're just going by this diagram means it should plow itself into the ground and you should never be able to go from Chicago to New York, and yet obviously they fly. And the reason they fly is this explanation only matters when the wing is like directly into the airstream. As soon as you pitch it up slightly, then some of the drag actually gets converted into lift. That is, some of the air hitting the wing and being deflected is actually, of course, pushing the animal up, totally changing the physics here. Now, you don't have to know that, but it's important to realize that these little just so stories that you learn in introductory physics are really bad. They're just so stories. They're true in an incredibly narrow range and don't even apply to how airplanes fly for the most part, let alone how like birds fly or pterosaurs or bats or dragons fly. In fact, most fighter planes have almost perfectly flat, which is a very slight curve on both sides of symmetrical wings. And that's partially because, of course, fighter pilots may be flying upside down, just as likely as they are to fly right side up. Well, not just as likely, but they got to work just as well. So sadly, since birds are not airplanes, we have to like accept that I'm not going to be able to go over the physics of flying in great detail here because that takes tons and tons of calculus. And instead, we're going to go back to like what can we learn about them. Helicopters are a slightly better model in that the aerodynamics of a similar shaped wing vary across the wing, but even then they don't move. Remember that the shape of a wing on these flapping animals literally changes throughout the flight. So it's not even just like a fixed wing where the only difference is like the air is going faster or slower. It's like literally the shape of the wing changes throughout the flap. It's really a pain in the butt to calculate, and it was only in the last decade that it became reasonably possible without breaking the bank to actually calculate those sorts of movable airfoils and what will happen. That said, oops, I should go back here for a sec. That said, these wings let you do amazing things. There are animals that fly with wings that can hover the way a hovercraft can, but they can do it with just regular sets of wings not with twirling items. And it also allows surprisingly big flying animals. Maybe we don't get the true dragon size like in some of the movies, but we do get some really, really huge flying animals in the past that would dwarf some of the man-made flying vehicles you can get into, some of the smaller ones at least, and that's worth noting because that's not actually a bad-sized dragon in a lot of cases. It might not be a giant alpha male at the end of Reign of Fire huge, but it's definitely, you wouldn't want it to get too close to me because it could eat me huge. The other downside of this means that, of course, we see flying animals all the time, so we tend to notice when things don't look very likely. And I have to be honest, when I saw X-Men 3 in theaters, there were several unintentional laughs, and this was one of them. It was a pretty packed theater, and some people cheered, but there were several laughs at it being unintentionally funny because really, there's just no way wings of this size would suffice to do much more than let the person maybe slow their descent a little if they're base jumping. They could parachute slightly, and we know this because if you look at a person on a hang glider, the actual wing size is much larger on a hang glider. And sort of points to a minimum realistic wing size necessary for a person of that weight. Okay, so brief summary for you guys. Designing flying creatures is a lot more constrained by physics than normal creature work, and I want to add to that. Oh no, I'll get to it below. Alternative wings, and we'll talk about some of those later, like insect wings or other solutions, often only work at a particular size. And that's another issue. Like, the bigger you get, kind of the more constrained your wings are, the less variation you can shove into them. which is why it's important to understand like where we have flexibility and should take advantage of it as designers and where we kind of don't. And then the other problem is we see lots of flying animals, lots of flying things throughout our lives. And so people have a surprisingly good intuitive feel for something that looks right and wrong. So when we do have to make a cheat because, for example, the animal wouldn't work, we need to like be smart about it to make it effective. Because audiences are pretty savvy, they see lots of flying things, and they'll call us out. And let's face it, nobody wants people to be laughing because your creature is unintentionally funny at a point that's supposed to be really dramatic or scary or something in the movie.